"You don't deserve this promotion," Everett whispered, deliberately pulling his hand away as mine hung extended before the entire department. 30 colleagues watched in stunned silence during what should have been my celebratory moment. The conference room felt like it had been drained of oxygen as Everett turned his back on me to chat with board members, leaving me standing alone on the small platform. My fingers curled into my palm, a quiet surrender. 2 years of stolen ideas, dismissed suggestions, and conveniently scheduled meetings that ensured I'd miss important presentations had culminated in this moment of public humiliation. The crystal award in my other hand, engraved with excellence in innovation, suddenly felt heavier than it should. I forced my lips into a smile that felt like a grimace and stepped down from the platform, navigating through sympathetic glances and awkward shoulder pats. But beneath my embarrassment burned something fiercer: certainty. Because whatever it didn't know, what no one at Bloom Design Studios knew, was that for 3 years, I'd been serving as a respected judge for the International Design Innovation Committee, evaluating breakthrough concepts from across the globe under strict confidentiality. And in exactly 8 weeks, Everett's revolutionary project would be sitting before me at the judges' table. Before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you something. Have you ever stood in a room full of people and felt completely invisible? That's how I felt every day at this company, despite being the one who kept the lights on. If you've ever been underestimated or pushed aside, stick with me until the end, because this story isn't just about revenge, it's about restoration. My name is Phoebe Thaler. I'm 32, and until that promotion ceremony, I'd spent 4 years as a sustainability analyst at Bloom, a mid-sized design firm that specialized in eco-friendly product development. I was hired for my master's research on biodegradable polymers, but Everett quickly relegated me to background tasks while presenting my findings as his own. I'm not naturally confrontational. My grandmother raised me to believe that excellence speaks for itself, that quiet persistence outlasts loud ambition. She taught me to cook without recipes, to garden by the moon's phases, and to solve problems with patience rather than force. These weren't just homespun philosophies, they were survival strategies for a woman who'd raised 3 children alone while running a small business in rural Pennsylvania. Your work should be a reflection of your character, she'd tell me, kneading bread dough with hands strong from decades of hard work, and your character should be unimpeachable. I carried those words with me through college, through graduate school, and into my professional life. Which is why, when the International Design Innovation Committee contacted me 3 years ago about serving as an anonymous judge, I accepted without hesitation. The committee operated with strict confidentiality. Judges remained unknown to prevent industry influence. My specialty was sustainability metrics, assessing how designs balanced environmental impact with practical implementation. The evaluation framework I developed was becoming the global standard in competition judging. While at work, Everett repeatedly shot down my sustainability proposals as impractical idealism. After the handshake incident, I returned to my desk, opened my personal calendar, and confirmed what I already knew. In 8 weeks, I would be leading the committee's annual championship event. The same event where Everett had submitted his project for consideration. Everything okay? I looked up to find Zeke, our IT specialist, standing at my desk. His kind eyes held genuine concern behind round glasses. "You handled that with more grace than most would have," he said quietly. I closed my calendar. Not much choice in the moment. "There's always a choice." Zeke placed a cup of herbal tea on my desk. "You could have thrown that award at his head. Very satisfying, but probably career-limiting." I laughed despite myself. "I need this job." "No," Zeke said, suddenly serious. "They need you. Everett just hasn't figured that out yet." I sipped the tea, chamomile with a hint of lavender, and felt my shoulders relax slightly. "Thanks, Zeke." "Anytime." He tapped my desk twice before walking away. "Some people build their castles by knocking down everyone else's. Doesn't make them stronger, just makes them the only one left standing." As I watched him go, something shifted inside me. I'd been playing defense for years, trying to protect my ideas while Everett claimed them as his own. Maybe it was time to change strategies. For the next 2 months, I maintained professional distance. I completed assignments, attended meetings, and watched Everett swagger through the office, bragging about his upcoming competition entry. He'd invested everything in this project: personal savings, borrowed resources, countless weekends. Winning would make his career. Losing would devastate him financially and professionally. What he didn't know was that his revolutionary sustainable packaging design, the one he'd been developing in secret, was built on principles I'd outlined in a proposal he'd rejected 9 months earlier. He'd dismissed my ideas as unrealistic in our team meeting, then quietly incorporated them into his personal project. I could have confronted him. I could have reported him to the board. But something held me back, not fear, but curiosity. I wanted to see how far he would go, how completely he would claim my concepts as his own. One Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks before the competition, Everett called an all-hands meeting. The entire design team gathered in the conference room as he unveiled mock-ups of his competition entry. "This," he announced, gesturing to the sleek display, "is the future of sustainable packaging." The design was familiar, too familiar. It was my biopolymer concept, refined and polished, but unmistakably mine. From the molecular structure to the manufacturing process, I could see my fingerprints all over it. But he'd added one element I hadn't considered: traditional basket weaving patterns from various indigenous cultures, incorporated into the polymer matrix to add structural integrity. The inspiration came to me during a documentary about ancient crafting techniques, he explained to the rapt audience. Nature's solutions hidden in plain sight all these centuries. I felt a chill run through me, not because he'd stolen my work. I'd expected that, but because he was now appropriating indigenous knowledge without attribution. The competition had strict ethical guidelines about cultural attribution and acknowledgement. As colleagues asked questions and offered congratulations, I quietly took notes, not on the design itself, but on his claims of originality. Each statement, each assertion of "my breakthrough" and "my discovery" was another nail in a coffin he didn't yet know he was building. Later that week, I received an email from the competition chairperson, Dr. Layla Mori. The judging panel would be instituting a new preliminary evaluation category this year: ethical sourcing and attribution. As lead judge, I was asked to develop the criteria. I stared at my screen, fingers hovering over the keyboard. This wasn't an opportunity for revenge. It was an opportunity for correction. The standards I would write wouldn't just affect Everett's entry. They would shape how the entire industry approached innovation and acknowledgement. That night, I stayed late at the office, drafting guidelines that would become the foundation for a new industry standard. 1. Clear documentation of all conceptual influences. 2. Proper attribution of cultural and traditional knowledge. 3. Transparent supply chain reporting. 4. Acknowledgement of collaborative contributions. These weren't designed to target Everett specifically. They were principles I genuinely believed should guide ethical design. The fact that his project violated several of these points wasn't personal. It was simply a reflection of his approach to innovation. The following Monday, with just 2 weeks until the competition, Everett called me into his office. His expression was uncharacteristically conciliatory as he gestured for me to sit. "Phoebe," he began, leaning forward across his desk, "I've been reflecting on the promotion ceremony, and I want to apologize for my behavior." I kept my face neutral, though surprise rippled through me. In 4 years, I'd never heard Everett apologize to anyone. "It was unprofessional," he continued, "and not reflective of the high standards we maintain at Bloom." His eyes never quite met mine, focusing instead on a point just beyond my shoulder. "Thank you for acknowledging that," I said carefully. "In the spirit of moving forward positively, I'd like you to join my team for the International Design Competition next month." Your sustainability expertise could be valuable as we prepare the final presentation. And there it was, the real reason for this sudden apology. He needed my expertise but wasn't willing to acknowledge that the core concept was already mine. That's an interesting offer, I replied, keeping my voice level. What aspects of the project would you like me to contribute to? He smiled, relaxing slightly. Some final refinements to the sustainability metrics, perhaps some help with the technical documentation. Nothing major. The design is essentially complete, but your attention to detail could help us edge out the competition. I nodded slowly. I'll need to check my schedule. The next few weeks are quite busy with the quarterly reports. Of course, he said smoothly, but this is a priority project. I'm sure we can adjust your other responsibilities. As I left his office, a plan began forming in my mind. Not a plan for revenge, but for revelation. The committee chairperson had scheduled a call for tomorrow, a routine check-in before the competition. What if it happened during our staff meeting? What if everyone heard exactly who I was in the design world? That night, I emailed Dr. Mori with a request. For the first time in 3 years, I asked to break protocol. The next morning, our weekly staff meeting began as usual. Everett was reviewing the quarterly projections when my phone rang. I deliberately left the sound on. I'm sorry, I said, pulling out my phone. It's the International Design Committee. Would you mind if I take this quickly? They're expecting my input on the championship event. Everett frowned but waved his permission, likely assuming I was handling some administrative detail for the competition he'd entered. I answered and put the phone on speaker. Dr. Mori, good morning. I'm actually in a staff meeting. Do you mind if I put you on speaker? Not at all, Phoebe, came the clear, authoritative voice of the committee chairperson. I wanted to confirm the details for next month. We need our lead judge to arrive 2 days early to oversee the preliminary evaluations, particularly the new ethical sourcing category you've developed. The room went silent. I watched as confusion, then dawning realization spread across Everett's face. That works with my schedule, I replied calmly. I've finalized the evaluation criteria for the new category and sent it to the other judges for review. Excellent, Dr. Mori continued. Your framework from last year's championship has been adopted by 3 other international competitions, by the way. The sustainability metrics you developed have become something of an industry standard. I could feel the weight of every gaze in the room. That's wonderful to hear. I'm looking forward to seeing this year's entries. After a few more details, I ended the call and looked up to find 20 pairs of wide eyes staring at me. Everett's face had drained of color. You're a judge, he said flatly, for the competition I've entered. I've been a judge for 3 years, I confirmed. Lead judge for sustainability metrics last year and head of the judging panel this year. The silence in the room was absolute. 4 years of dismissed ideas, stolen credit, and professional undermining hung in the balance of this moment. I believe we were discussing the quarterly projections, I said, turning to the screen where Everett's presentation was still displayed. He opened his mouth, closed it, then nodded stiffly and continued the presentation with noticeably less enthusiasm. After the meeting, colleagues approached me one by one, asking about my role with the committee, congratulating me on the position. Everett avoided me entirely, locking himself in his office for the remainder of the day. That evening, as I packed up to leave, I found Zeke waiting by the elevator. That was quite a revelation today, he said with a small smile. I don't think I've ever seen Everett speechless before. I pressed the elevator button. It wasn't planned that way. Wasn't it? Zeke raised an eyebrow. Because it looked an awful lot like the most elegant professional checkmate I've ever witnessed. The elevator doors opened and we stepped inside. What happens now? He asked as we descended. With the competition, I mean. I considered this carefully. I judge his entry fairly, according to the established criteria, including the new ethical sourcing standards. And if it fails those standards? The elevator reached the ground floor and the doors opened to the lobby. Then it fails those standards, I said simply. This isn't about revenge, Zeke. It's about integrity. As we walked through the lobby, Zeke shook his head admiringly. You know, most people, after being treated the way you've been treated, would be planning something much more dramatic. I pushed open the door to the cool evening air. My grandmother used to say that the most powerful response to dishonesty isn't more dishonesty, it's radical transparency. Over the next 2 weeks, Everett made numerous attempts to speak with me privately. I maintained professional courtesy but declined any discussion of the competition. The ethical guidelines had been published on the committee's website. The same standards would apply to every entry, including his. The competition was held in a renovated industrial space in Copenhagen, all exposed brick and massive windows overlooking the harbor. Designers from 26 countries had gathered, their innovations arranged on pristine white pedestals throughout the cavernous main hall. As lead judge, I arrived 2 days early to oversee preparations and meet with the other judges, renowned experts in industrial design, materials science, and cultural studies. The atmosphere was collegial but focused. We all understood the responsibility of our positions. On the morning entries arrived, I walked the empty exhibition hall alone, reviewing the judging framework I'd developed. My footsteps echoed on the polished concrete as I mentally prepared for the impartiality the next 3 days would require. Phoebe. I turned to find Everett standing near the entrance, a shipping crate beside him. His travel suit looked rumpled, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. Everett, I acknowledged with a professional nod. The competitor check-in is at the south entrance. He stepped forward, leaving his crate behind. We need to talk. About the competition, I'm afraid that would be inappropriate given my position. About us, he said, lowering his voice. About our working relationship. I maintain the professional distance between us. This isn't the time or place for that discussion. You could recuse yourself, he suggested, his tone carefully casual. Given our history, there's a clear conflict of interest. So that was his strategy. Get me removed from judging his entry. What history would that be exactly? The history where you've taken credit for my work for 4 years? Or the history where you publicly humiliated me at my promotion ceremony? He flinched slightly. I've already apologized for that. You apologized when you needed something from me, I corrected him. And now you're suggesting I compromise my professional ethics because it might benefit you. That's not. The judging criteria are publicly available. I continued. Every entry will be evaluated according to the same standards. If your design meets those standards, you have nothing to worry about. His expression hardened. This new ethics category, you created it specifically to target me. I created it to address a gap in how we evaluate innovation. I replied evenly. If you're concerned your entry doesn't adequately attribute its influences, perhaps that's something to reflect on. A staff member appeared at the entrance. Mr. Everett, we need to process your entry at registration. He held my gaze for a moment longer. This isn't over. Actually, I said quietly, it is. Good luck with your entry. As he walked away, I felt a strange lightness. For years, I'd shrunk myself in his presence, careful not to challenge his authority or trigger his temper. Now, standing in my own authority, I realized how much energy that constant accommodation had consumed. The competition officially opened the following morning. The judging panel spent the day reviewing written submissions and examining physical prototypes. By design, we didn't know which entries belonged to which designers during the preliminary round. Entry 42, Everett's submission, was as impressive as I'd expected. The biopolymer packaging incorporated intricate structural elements inspired by indigenous weaving patterns, creating remarkable strength with minimal material. The technical execution was flawless. But as I reviewed the documentation, the absence of attribution was glaring. The entry claimed original discovery of structural principles that had been used by indigenous cultures for centuries. There was no acknowledgement of the cultural origins, no recognition of the traditional knowledge being leveraged. That evening, the 7 judges gathered to discuss our preliminary rankings. We sat around a circular table in a private conference room, each with our notes spread before us. Entry 42 shows remarkable innovation in materials application, noted Dr. D. Kensington, the materials science expert from Edinburgh. The tensile strength achieved with such minimal polymer use is unprecedented. The manufacturing scalability is impressive as well, added Professor Amara from Lagos. This could revolutionize packaging for temperature-sensitive pharmaceuticals in developing regions. The discussion continued, with each judge highlighting different strengths of Everett's design. Then, Dr. Mori turned to me. Phoebe, you've been quiet. Your thoughts on 42? All eyes turned to me. This was the moment that would define not just Everett's future, but my own professional integrity. I could feel the weight of my grandmother's wisdom. Your character should be unimpeachable. The technical execution is exceptional, I began, keeping my voice neutral. However, I have serious concerns about the ethical framework of this entry. I opened the reference materials I'd prepared, academic papers documenting the specific weaving techniques being used, photographs of traditional baskets that clearly showed the same structural patterns, historical records of these methods dating back centuries. The entry claims original discovery of structural principles that have been in use by at least 3 indigenous cultures for generations. I explained, passing the materials around the table. There's no attribution, no acknowledgement, not even a mention of inspiration from these sources. The room grew quiet as the other judges examined my evidence. This is rather blatant, Dr. Kensington said finally, looking up from the photographs. These aren't vague similarities, these are direct applications of traditional techniques without any acknowledgement. Professor Amara nodded solemnly. Under our new ethical sourcing criteria, this is a clear violation. The discussion shifted, becoming more somber as the judges recognized the implications. Entry 42 was technically brilliant but ethically compromised. We need to be absolutely certain, Dr. Mori said, looking around the table. This decision will have significant consequences for the designer. I've provided primary sources documenting each technique, I replied. The evidence speaks for itself. By the end of the evening, we had reached consensus. Entry 42 would receive top scores for technical execution and innovation, but would fail the ethical sourcing category so completely that it couldn't advance to the final round. I returned to my hotel room that night feeling hollow rather than triumphant. This wasn't about winning or losing, it was about establishing a standard that should have existed all along. The next morning, the preliminary results were posted. Designers gathered around the digital displays, searching for their entry numbers. I watched from a distance as Everett approached the screen, confidence in his stride. I saw the moment he processed the information, his body went rigid, his hand reached out to steady himself against the wall. He turned, scanning the room until his eyes found mine. The rage in his expression was unmistakable. He started toward me, cutting through the crowd with determined steps. You did this, he hissed when he reached me, keeping his voice low enough that only I could hear. You deliberately sabotaged my entry. Your entry failed to meet the published ethical criteria, I replied calmly. The decision was unanimous among all 7 judges. Criteria you created. His face was flushed with anger. You engineered this entire situation. I established standards for ethical attribution that the entire judging panel endorsed. I corrected him. Your design incorporated indigenous techniques without acknowledgement. That's not my personal opinion. It's documented fact. You've just destroyed years of work, he said, his voice breaking slightly. Do you understand what this means for me? For my career? For a moment, I glimpsed something I'd never seen in Everett before. Vulnerability, the realization that his actions had consequences. That appropriating others' work, whether mine or indigenous creators, wasn't just unethical, it was ultimately self-defeating. I understand exactly what it means to have years of work go unrecognized, I said quietly. The difference is, you could have acknowledged your sources, You chose not to. Dr. Mori appeared at my side. Is everything all right here? Fine, Everett said, straightening his posture and forcing a neutral expression, just congratulating the judge on her thorough evaluation process. He walked away, shoulders rigid with suppressed fury. That looked intense, Dr. Mori observed. He's from my company, I explained. We have history. Her eyebrows rose. Should you have recused yourself? I considered it, I admitted, but the decision wasn't mine alone, and the evidence was clear. She nodded thoughtfully. Integrity sometimes costs us, but it's the only currency that never devalues. The remainder of the competition proceeded without incident. Everett disappeared after the preliminary results were announced, withdrawing his entry and leaving Copenhagen without speaking to anyone. The grand prize ultimately went to a design team from South Korea, whose biodegradable packaging incorporated traditional Hanji papermaking techniques with full attribution and partnership with traditional craftspeople. When I returned to the office the following Monday, an unusual hush fell over the design department as I walked to my desk. Zeke intercepted me by the coffee machine, his expression concerned. Everett called an emergency board meeting yesterday, he murmured. Claimed you had a personal vendetta and abused your position as judge. My stomach tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. The judging panel was unanimous. I have documentation. You might need it, Zeke warned. He's pushing for your termination. Before I could respond, my desk phone rang. The CEO's assistant was requesting my immediate presence in the boardroom. The walk to the executive floor felt endless. I'd done nothing wrong, had acted with complete professional integrity, yet now my job was in jeopardy. The irony wasn't lost on me. I might lose my position for upholding the very standards the design industry claimed to value. The boardroom door was heavy, requiring a deliberate push to open. Inside, the company's 7 board members sat along one side of a long table. Everett stood at the head, mid-presentation. He froze when I entered. Ms. Thaler, thank you for joining us, said Amelia Brandt, the CEO. Her expression revealed nothing as she gestured to an empty chair. Please, have a seat. I took the indicated chair, directly opposite the board members, feeling like I was facing a tribunal. The presentation screen behind Everett displayed a slide titled Ethical Concerns, Conflict of Interest. Mr. Everett was just explaining his perspective on what occurred at the international design competition. Amelia continued. He's raised concerns about potential impropriety in the judging process. I met her gaze steadily. I understand his concerns. I'm prepared to address them. The timing of this new ethics category was clearly targeted. Everett interjected, his voice tight with controlled anger. Phoebe used her position to enact a personal vendetta. That's a serious accusation, Amelia noted. Miss Thaler, your response? I opened my laptop and connected it to the room's display system. May I present some documentation? At Amelia's nod, I pulled up the materials I'd shown the judging panel, the academic papers, the historical photographs, the side-by-side comparisons of indigenous techniques, and Everett's design. The ethics category wasn't created to target any specific entry, I explained, my voice calm and professional. It was established to address a gap in how innovation is evaluated. All entries were judged according to the same criteria, which were published well before the competition. I displayed the email timeline showing when the criteria were developed and published, then continued. Mr. Everett's entry incorporated these specific traditional techniques without attribution. The decision to disqualify the entry was unanimous among all 7 international judges. The board members leaned forward, examining the evidence on the screen. One of them, Dr. Kimball, looked up at Everett. Did you incorporate these indigenous techniques? Everett's confidence wavered visibly. I was inspired by certain traditional approaches. That's not what I asked, Dr. Kimball interrupted. Did you use these specific techniques without attribution? The room grew silent as Everett struggled to formulate a response that wouldn't incriminate him. Finally, he said, The design industry has always built upon existing concepts. Nothing is truly original. That's precisely why attribution matters, I said quietly. Innovation doesn't happen in isolation. The ethical standard isn't about not being influenced. It's about acknowledging those influences honestly. Amelia studied Everett carefully. You called this meeting alleging that Ms. Thaler acted improperly, yet the evidence suggests she simply applied consistent standards that your entry failed to meet. There's more, I added, bringing up a new slide. I'd like to address Mr. Everett's claim that I was motivated by a personal vendetta. I displayed a proposal I'd submitted 9 months earlier, the one Everett had rejected in a team meeting as unrealistic idealism. Side by side with images of his competition entry, the conceptual similarities were undeniable. This proposal contains the core biopolymer concept that formed the foundation of Mr. Everett's competition entry, I explained. He rejected it publicly, then developed it privately for his own recognition. The atmosphere in the room shifted palpably. What had begun as my defense had transformed into something else entirely, an exposé of a pattern of behavior. Dr. Kimball cleared his throat. Mr. Everett, is this accurate? Did you appropriate Miss Thaler's concept after rejecting it officially? Everett's face had gone pale. The concepts evolved independently. There are bound to be similarities when working in the same field. The molecular structure is identical, Dr. Kimball pointed out, studying the screen. These aren't vague similarities. Amelia raised her hand, silencing further discussion. I think we have enough information. She turned to Everett. You called this meeting to question Miss Thaler's professional conduct. Instead, you've raised serious concerns about your own. She looked at the other board members, who nodded in silent agreement. Mr. Everett, please wait outside while we discuss this matter privately with Miss Thaler. The look Everett gave me as he left the room contained such hatred that I almost flinched. Almost. When the door closed behind him, Amelia turned to me. How long has this been going on? The appropriation of ideas? I asked. Since I joined the company 4 years ago. Not just mine, other team members as well. Most were too intimidated to speak up. And you've maintained documentation all this time? I nodded. I didn't plan to use it. I just needed to remember that I wasn't imagining things. The board members exchanged glances. Miss Thaler, Amelia said finally, I owe you an apology on behalf of this company. We failed to create an environment where you felt your contributions would be recognized fairly. I don't want an apology, I replied honestly. I want change, not just for me, but for everyone here with ideas worth developing. Amelia nodded slowly. What would you suggest? Transparent attribution protocols, I said without hesitation. Clear documentation of where concepts originate. Collaborative credit for collaborative work. The same ethical standards we expect in competition should apply to our daily operations. Essentially, you want to implement your international judging framework internally, Dr. Kimball observed. Yes, because innovation thrives with proper attribution, not despite it. Amelia studied me thoughtfully. We have an executive position opening up, head of innovation ethics. It's a new role we've been considering for some time, but finding the right person has been challenging. She glanced at the evidence still displayed on the screen. I believe we may have found her. 3 days later, Everett cleared out his office while the department pretended not to watch. He'd been offered a choice, resignation or termination with cause. He chose the former, leaving with a cardboard box and wounded pride. I was announced as the new head of innovation ethics the following week, with a corner office and a mandate to implement attribution protocols across all departments. The promotion came with a ceremony, a small gathering in the same conference room where Everett had refused my handshake months earlier. Amelia presented me with a new award, one created specifically for the position, a crystal prism etched with the words, Transparency in Innovation. When she extended her hand, I took it without hesitation. Phoebe Thaler. She announced to the gathered employees. exemplifies the standards to which we should all aspire. Her commitment to ethical innovation will guide us into a new era of creative development. As applause filled the room, I caught Zeke's eye across the crowd. He gave me a subtle thumbs up, a quiet acknowledgement of how far I'd come. That evening, as I arranged my belongings in my new office, my phone chimed with an email notification. It was from Dr. Mori at the International Design Committee. "Your attribution framework has been formally adopted by the World Design Council," she wrote. "All major competitions will implement it beginning next season. You've changed the landscape, Phoebe. Proper acknowledgement of indigenous techniques is already inspiring new collaborations between designers and traditional craftspeople." I stood at my office window, watching the sunset paint the city in golden light. My grandmother's wisdom echoed in my mind. Your work should be a reflection of your character, and your character should be unimpeachable. The framework I'd created wasn't just about preventing people like Everett from taking credit for others' ideas. It was about creating a world where innovation could flourish through honest collaboration, where traditional knowledge was respected rather than exploited, where transparency was valued over self-promotion. Sometimes the most powerful form of justice isn't revenge, but reform, changing the system so thoroughly that the old ways of operating simply become impossible. A week later, I received a small package with no return address. Inside was a handcrafted woven basket, clearly made using one of the indigenous techniques Everett had attempted to claim. A note accompanied it. "To the woman who reminded an industry that our foundations matter. Some of us were watching, learning, and changing because of you. Thank you for your courage." It wasn't signed, but I didn't need a signature to understand its meaning. Change rarely happens in grand, dramatic moments. It happens in the quiet, persistent application of principles. In the courage to stand in your truth, even when standing alone. If you've ever felt invisible in your workplace, if you've ever had your ideas dismissed or appropriated, know this: your perspective matters. Your contributions are valuable. And sometimes, the most powerful response to injustice isn't a direct confrontation, but the creation of a system where such injustice simply cannot thrive. Like, share, and subscribe if this story resonated with you. Your experiences matter, and sharing them helps others find the courage to stand in their truth. Remember, the most lasting revenge isn't about destroying someone else's castle. It's about building a world where everyone's foundations are acknowledged, respected, and celebrated.